Welcome to another episode of MEDIMAGZA The Podcast, South Africa's premier medical lifestyle show, where we bring you expert insights, practical tips, and inspiring stories to help you live your healthiest, most empowered life. I'm your host, Clive Maestri, and today we're diving into a topic that affects most of us, especially as we kick off the new year: executive functioning, ADHD, and how to set ourselves up for success. Joining us is Tasneem Abrahams, an occupational therapist, neurodiversity ally, and a founder of the Private Practice Growth Club. Welcome to the show, Tasneem.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much for my article in your magazine.
It's been a real hit, so hence we're going to dive a bit deeper into it today and unpack a few things that I think our readers would love to know. So, firstly, Tasneem, for listeners who might be new to the concept, what exactly is executive functioning and why is it so important for daily life?
Okay, so the best way to explain it is if you imagine that your brain consists of two parts. There's the frontal lobe. So if you do this first action with your hand, the first front part here is the frontal lobe, and that's responsible for all your executive functioning. And then the rest of the brain is the non-thinking, non-feeling part of your brain. So it's the limbic system, your emotional regulation center, all of those things. So what executive functioning, that control center is like the control center of your brain. If you look at the word executive, it stems from the word to execute. So it's the part of the brain that helps you to execute things on day to day. And if you think of like a control tower in an airport, you get all those little people that are controlling where the planes go and the timing and when they must land. That's basically what your executive functions are, to make sure everything runs smoothly.
All right, that's brilliant. And thank you for breaking it down in such a logical manner for us. How does ADHD specifically impact executive functioning? And what are some signs adults and teens should look out for?
So all people with ADHD have executive functioning challenges. It is essentially a dysfunction of executive functioning, but not everyone with executive functioning challenges have ADHD. So I just want to make that really clear. Um, ADHD, many people have now, as research has started to come about into ADHD, are starting to think that the name of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder is actually incorrect, because what we're seeing that people hear the name and they think that it's simply just a deficit of attention, because that's what it says in the name, right?
Hmm.
Or it's hyperactivity. But actually, we're seeing that a lot of people with ADHD don't have a deficit of attention. What they have is a dysregulation of attention. So some people with ADHD have an abundance of attention. They just struggle to regulate it and focus it in the right place at the right time in the right amounts. And in addition to that, it makes the diagnosis sound like it's all about attention, when actually it's about so much more. So digging deeper into what executive functioning is, it consists of many things. It consists of attention is one, but it also consists of emotional regulation. It consists of planning, organization, decision making, problem solving, goal directed persistence, which is essentially your ability to continue even when things get hard, impulsivity, task initiation, which if you struggle with task initiation, it's essentially procrastination. Um, so it's many different aspects of executive functioning, not just attention, but those things all kind of interrelate, because if you struggle with one thing, it might affect your attention.
Yes.
Working memory is a really great example. Working memory and attention, I always say it's kind of like a chicken and egg relationship, because if you have poor working memory, it's going to affect your ability to concentrate, because you're constantly trying to remember things to use that information. But on the other hand, if you have poor attention regulation, you're not going to be able to remember things in your working memory. So which one is the one that is the core problem? It's
Yeah.
difficult to tell because they go so interrelated.
So,
Yeah.
so interrelated, all codependent almost on each other to provide the mechanism it needs to, essentially. The pressure of setting these new goals for the new year, new year, new me. Why can this be especially overwhelming for people with executive functioning challenges?
ADHD is what makes it different to somebody who has executive functioning challenges that doesn't have ADHD, is the pervasive nature of the challenges and the extended period of time, and most importantly, how it impacts functioning. I read a post on LinkedIn recently where the guy was talking about, psychiatrist was mentioning the difference between traits and disorder. Many of us, we are human, flawed. That's the nature of being human. We have many dysfunctional traits, but it doesn't mean that we have a disorder until it severely impacts our day-to-day functioning. And for people with ADHD, sometimes they look like they are functioning well. They are often high achievers, successful in their careers and their lives, but behind closed doors, when they are by themselves, they are really struggling and constantly for a long period of time. And why it was kind of difficult writing the article because, like I said, all of these tips can help all of us. But why it's especially important for people with ADHD is because just implementing tips doesn't necessarily help for somebody with ADHD because they have so much additional functional issues that come with it.
Mm,
And it's so much more enhanced and pronounced, and it's so much more difficult than just having a problem with being late or having a problem with procrastination. It's so pervasive in their lives, and it can cause a lot of anxiety. And if you've been struggling with ADHD for a long time, and especially somebody who is an adult with ADHD, you're carrying a lot of that emotional baggage from when you are a child of always thinking that you're a failure, always worried that people are like, judging you because you can't do things, always asking. I have so many of my clients who says, I look at other people and I think, how do they just do things so easily? Why do I struggle like this? So that additional baggage that they've carried with them for their whole entire lives is now also bundled on top of this, this thing where it's like I have to make new year, new me resolutions, and I have to make
yeah.
this my year, and all of those things we see on social media.
Yeah. Also personally feel like the human condition, we are so used to just adding extra baggage onto our own burdens where we don't need to. And it's human nature at the end of the day. I love that you mentioned that not all executive function difficulties are due to ADHD. What other factors do you think can affect these skills, even temporarily?
And I'm glad you asked that because it's so important for people to recognize that just because they resonate with ADHD, especially so much content going on now, which is great because more people are getting the help they need. But at the same time, a lot of people are self-diagnosing without going to seek a professional and understanding what the core root is of why they're struggling. So, if we're saying that executive functions is really the part of the brain that helps you do things and plan, organize, make decisions, etc., if you think about it, any situation where you are in a state of trauma or something is impacting your ability to think logically or think straight is going to affect your executive functioning. So we all talk about and joke about porridge brain in pregnancy, like major executive functioning difficulties when you are certain phases of pregnancy. There's a lot of information now around how menopause, perimenopause also causes executive functioning challenges in women. Now, if you couple that with a woman who already has ADHD, can you imagine that why it becomes so difficult at that age? If you go through grief, how many times do when somebody experiences grief or loss of a loved one or a major life event that causes them to be experience grief, you don't function in your normal executive brain. Like you're thinking from an emotion center. Trauma, post-traumatic stress, if you already have anxiety or depression and you go through a chronic or an acute phase where you're really struggling, that is going to affect your executive functions.
Mm,
And it's really difficult because it's up to the professional through lots of history taking and interviewing and assessing to really understand, was the executive function challenges there before all of this already, and now this situation is making it worse,
yeah.
or was this situation the thing that basically was a catalyst to this person experiencing these ADHD like symptoms, but there's a chance that through addressing this other issue that they might be able to go back to their pre-trauma self, so to speak.
Yeah. It's amazing how that is, right? You may be experiencing something for a very long time and you don't really address it until something triggers it or something's the catalyst to say, Maybe I haven't really been well for so long and it's been on my mind the whole time. Tasneem, tell me, what are some common hurdles, especially around this time for our readers as well, that people face when trying to get back into the routine, especially after the holidays or break?
Yes, so the difficulty with after holidays, and we're talking about New Year, but it's really after any kind of change, massive change in your daily reality. So even if it's in the middle of the year and you go for like a June school holiday break for like 2 weeks and you've now taken leave and you come back, you experience the same issue, right? And the reason why that's difficult is that human beings, we do thrive on predictability because it gives us a sense of control. I always say to my clients who have anxiety is that for me, the simplistic way to look at anxiety is a feeling of a loss of sense of agency or control of an outcome. And when you feel like you can't control an outcome or you don't know what to expect, that causes you to feel those feelings. And so when we have predictability or routine, that gives us a sense of control. And as soon as you go on a holiday, you've kind of thrown that whole predictable routine, etc., out the window, and you have to orientate yourself to this back to reality, so to speak. And so why it's difficult is because your body also your brain also thrives on the if you think about the concept of mental load is constantly having to process information to make decisions, right? And when you set up sort of a routine or you know what to expect, it means you have to think less. So
Mm,
when you go on holiday, your brain thrives on identifying patterns so that it can reduce the mental load. Your brain's whole job is to conserve energy and to protect you. And the minute the brain thinks that this is going to be too much energy or this is going to be too much effort, it's going to harm you, that's when your fight, flight, freeze, shutdown responses come into play, even whether it's good for you or not. And so when you go on holiday, suddenly your brain is now like picking up a new pattern. If you go on holiday for 2 days, 3 days, that's okay. But at minutes it's for a prolonged period of time, and you kind of now your brain is picking up this new pattern, and it's all this fun, happy feelings. Now you go back,
mm.
and it's like now your brain has to readjust to like, how do I do this again? What is this? What's going on? And then the anxiety kicks in because you like don't feel in control of what's happening.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's the best
yeah.
way I can explain it.
No, that's beautiful, and that's so true. I feel like the moment we, as especially adults, feel overstimulated, our fight or flight kicks in so quickly, and that trigger of anxiety does happen. The next question, which I'm also very intrigued about, can you walk us through the card method for lightening the load and managing tasks?
Yes, so interestingly, I didn't even come up with that acronym for therapy. It was actually in my coaching that I do with other private practice professionals around like time management and like, you have a lot of stuff you have to do as a business owner, etc. And the card system essentially is a system I let people go through when they feel like they've got too much on their plate and I talk a lot about using a capacity informed approach to anything, setting up routines, coming up with solutions for your mental health, etc. Capacity is essentially the time and energy you have available to you.
Mhm.
And I always say, like, say you have to bake a cake and it's going to take you 30 minutes, but you only have 15 minutes. No amount of amazing planning, organizational skills is going to make that a reality. The
Right.
capacities do not match up. And that's often the problem is we try and put solutions in place or time manage and use the Eisenhower matrix to like prioritize things, but we're prioritizing things that is not realistic, and so it doesn't become sustainable and we don't stick with it. So the card method is a way of just going through all the roles, responsibilities, tasks, activities that you are required to do and just kind of pairing back in a very systematic way. So what it stands for is the C stands for cut. So you go through the list and you identify, is there anything here that I'm currently spending my time on that I either need to cut down or cut out completely? Social media is a very good example. All of us are guilty of it. We scroll too much on our phone. If you see that you are spending X amount of time on social media and you're like, okay, I don't want to cut it out completely because let's be realistic, we can't cut it out of our lives,
Yeah.
but I would like to cut it down at least, right? That's you already making your capacity more capacity for time available and for mental energy because it takes a
Mm,
lot out of you. The A stands for automate. Are there any things that you are doing that you can automate using a technology tool? So let's say, for example, you have to pay your rent, and you know you have to pay it on the same date every month. I have to pay my rent in my office every month before the first. So let's say I say, okay, on the 28th every month, I'm going to pay it because I know I always have money on that date. So instead of me manually remembering to do that and then manually taking time to do it, it might seem like, ah, it doesn't take so long, but actually it's just another thing. These things add up. If I create a scheduled payment in my banking app that
mm,
automatically goes out on the 28th, if I want to maintain some form of control, I can set it up that it sends a scheduled payment, but it asks me, do you want to approve this payment? It still automates that process. And we are blessed to live in an age where we have lots of tools available to us that we can automate things like that.
mm,
The R stands for routinize. Now, routinize is an interesting one because basically you look at what are things in your life, roles, responsibilities, or activities that are repeatable, things you do more than one, repetitively, that you can routinize. So let's say, take for example, exercise. One of the biggest reasons why, and I'm very guilty of not sticking with exercise routines, but one of the big reasons why we don't is because we haven't routinized it into our day. If you want it to be a repeatable event, then you need to put it in a slot that makes sense, that it forms part of the flow. So for example, one of the things that I've decided to do this year is that even my motto is something is better than nothing. So my goal isn't to exercise, it's to move my body a little bit at least every day, even if it's just 5 minutes. That if I'm, let's say, if I've habit stacked the exercise with the routine, something I already do, like brushing my teeth, is that when I brush my teeth, I must do some form of movement. If I only have time for 10 sit-ups, that's all I'm going to do. If I
mm.
only have time to run on the spot for 5 minutes, that's all I'm going to do. But I'm routinizing that activity.
Right.
It's the same thing with the order of which you do things. If you routinize your morning routine of getting done in the morning, it means you don't have to think about it. So the minute you don't have to think about something, you're reducing the mental load, which increases your mental capacity to think about other things.
Right.
But then routinizing is also about looking at identifying things that are already routine, that's maybe outside of your control, which I refer to as anchor events. So, for example, if I know I have to fetch my child at school every day at 2:30, that is a routinized thing, but it's also an anchor event. I don't have control over that. The school decides the fetching time. So I have to do that and I can block that time because I know I have to be there at 2:30, right?
Yeah.
So the minute you routinize things, you increase your mental capacity and you also set yourself some sort of anchors that you can then measure your other flexible times you have available. What capacity do you truly have
Yeah.
once you actually identify all those routines? And then the last one is D, which stands for delegate or defer. So are there any things that you are doing that you can delegate to someone else or some tool or can defer to a later date? I'll use the same example of fetching my kids from school. Let's say I see that the fetching kids from school is such a drain on my capacity in terms of time and mental energy. I can then ask myself, is that something that can be delegated? Obviously, you have to be realistic and say, like, there's money, resources attached. So if I put my kids on a transport, for example, that removes that whole thing from my routine. How much does it cost me, and how much can I earn back in that time if I
Mm,
release some of that capacity? Is
yeah.
there going to be return on investment of my time and energy and money if I do that? You can make those decisions. Or is there a project that I'm busy working on, which is important to me, but given that my capacity is so limited and what my priorities are, this is something I'm going to defer to a later date. So that's basically what the card system is.
That's so interesting, and we're definitely going to chat about this again at some stage in the year because I feel that's so important. All of those acronyms and what you say actually makes so much sense. I can tell you personally, I am such a stickler for notes. And those that know me know my notes have notes. And the next question I've been smiling about because I often call people out on it, and I call it, are you having task paralysis? Because it's like almost you know what you need to do, but you're just stuck on that not doing button. So the next question, what practical tips do you have for our listeners who struggle with tasks initiation even? And what can they do to kind of alleviate that?
So in occupational therapy, we talk about something called task concept, and what that essentially is that a task consists of many phases. There's the task ideation when you think of what task you need to do. Then there's the planning phase where you plan how you're going to do it. Then there's the initiation where you actually start the activity. Then there's the execution where you continue doing the activity. And then there's the completion where you see it through to completion. And once you've completed, very importantly, what people forget is the task evaluation part where you actually internally evaluate how well you think you did, etc. And that whole process, when you have all of it, you have task consolidation. But as humans, there's always one or more aspects of that whole process that we are challenged in. So for some people, they struggle with coming with ideas. So they like people to tell them, I want you to do this. So, they need more direction and instruction. For other people, task planning is an issue where they don't know how to pause and plan. A lot of that is also to do with lack of inhibition. Or they're impatient. So they just get started and they don't actually think about how am I going to do this. If somebody struggles with task initiation, that means they procrastinate. And there's various reasons. A lot of it is anxiety or overwhelm because they didn't do the planning bit. So they are feeling overwhelmed because the task feels so big.
Yeah.
And people say it's perfectionism, but perfectionism is basically anxiety. That's all it is. You're anxious
Mm.
about the outcome. You can't control it. You worry it's not going to be perfect. And then, so when people who struggle with task initiation procrastinate, people who struggle with execution have big ideas, they'll start things, but they won't see it through, and then they often will struggle with task completion. So those are the people who say, "Oh, I start so many things and I never see it through to the end." And then you get people who have task evaluation struggles where they either over negatively evaluate themselves, so they're very harsh on themselves. These are often the perfectionists, or they overinflate how well they did, and so they are often not making the changes they need to in how they do a task. So when you talk about task paralysis, it's really important to understand like where are you in that sort of flow of what it is that you are struggling with most, and then dig into why it is. Once you know that, you can then identify the strategy that you need to do. So let's take task initiation as a good example because I think most people struggle with procrastination. If I say that procrastination is essentially anxiety and overwhelm about the task, not knowing what the first step is, not knowing what the outcome is going to be, not knowing how to start. The best way to overcome procrastination without also going into a planning paralysis is to ask yourself, okay, what how do I break this task up into smaller chunks? So you're not necessarily planning it out, you're just breaking it up into smaller chunks. So let's say, for example, I had to write this article, right? Now, that can seem like big and overwhelming because I have so much to say. Where do I start? Like, then I'm just not going to start it, right? So if I ask myself, okay, what are the steps or the stages? And little free tip, there's a really cool free tool. You don't have to sign in or anything, but there's a tool you can put in where you can describe what it is you want to do. So if you're even struggling to break things down into chunks, you can put it into this tool and it will actually break it down for you. And each step you can ask it, break this down even further. So even
Oh,
if you
wow.
needed to tell you, sit at your desk, take out your laptop, open Word, it will tell you those things. But let's say with the article, for example, so I know, okay, firstly, I need to ask myself, what questions do I want to answer in this article? Then I need to go and do research and find evidence for what I'm saying because I want the article to be evidence-based. Then I need to do an outline of the article and say, okay, I need an introduction. These are the things I'm going to answer. Then I need to put that into a Word document and start a draft. Then I need to
Mm.
start typing up my thoughts. So if I write down those steps, right, then I say to myself, okay, now ignore all of that steps and just pick the first one and just do that. Just start with that. And sometimes it can be as simple as, I mean, I had a workshop with university students who also said, that they wait until the last minute. And I said to them, okay, when you do your assignment, right, you have to write it on a Word document. So how about to just get over that hurdle of the first step? You open up your computer and open up Word, name the document, write the title, write the headings, etc. But you started. And then if you still feel like you're on a blank and you don't know what to type, just type on the page. I don't know what I need to type. I'm feeling really overwhelmed. Where do I even start? This is what I'm supposed to. You feel that your thoughts are also going too fast, like something like ChatGPT, not to ask it to write your assignment, but to talk to it and say, I'm supposed to write this. I don't know. These are my thoughts. Can you ask me questions about what I'm thinking about this? And then I can answer it. Then you can at least get started and you can start taking your own words and putting it into Word. And then at least you have started. Because most people say, if somebody gives me something that's already started and I just carry on with it, I find it so much easier. So that, gets you over that initial hurdle.
Mm, mm. That's so true. I think it's just a matter of sitting down and getting started. I think that's the biggest thing. It's like going to gym. It's just once you've actually put on your shoes or your trainers, you're like, okay, I'm good. Um,
Yeah.
how can body doubling and daily planning windows help improve focus and follow through?
Okay, so there's two things actually. There's body doubling and then there's having an accountability partner, and that can look the same or it can look different. So body doubling is essentially it's a form of accountability because you have somebody sitting with you, but it also it creates sort of an energy of work being done, and so it can motivate somebody if you have somebody sitting next to you also working on something. And so, how that would work is, let's say you need to write an article and your colleague needs to write an article, and you say, okay, let's sit together from this time to that time. And during that time, we're not going to talk to each other. This is what I want to achieve in this hour, and this is what you want to achieve in this hour. And we're going to sit and we're going to talk, and afterwards, we can just do our work, and we're going to see, report back to each other and say, oh, this is how far I got. This is why I struggled. I didn't do as much as I wanted to. And in fact, there's a website called Focus Mate. So if you don't have somebody you can body double with, there's a website called Focus Mate, and you can actually sign on there. You can say, and people around the world, all over the world, will sign on. And you can say, okay, tomorrow at 10 a.m., I want to have a session with someone. There's strict rules because it's not a social platform. It's strictly for getting work done. So basically, I tried it once. You log on at the same time as the person. You do some basic introductions. You're not allowed to share personal information. You just say, hi, I'm Tasneem. Today, I'm going to work on this article. And in the next hour, I'd like to at least get a first draft done of the first introduction and find some credible, references. And then Clive will come and say, hi, I'm Clive. Today I'm working on editing the layout of the magazine, and I'd like to at least get through X, Y, and Z. And you say, okay, good luck. You leave your cameras on, but you put the sound off, and then you start working together on the
Oh,
computer.
wow.
Then at the end of the hour, you come back to each other and you say, how did you do, Clive? And Clive says, well, I got through most of it, but this is something I was struggling with, so I'm not totally happy, but at least I did get some work done. I'm like, oh, yes, no, I didn't finally finalize the draft, but I got quite a lot of good research. Thank you. Have a good day, and off you go. So that is a website that you can use. But you can do that same thing with a friend, with a fellow student, with a colleague, with a family member, etc.
Mm,
Accountability doesn't have to look like sitting with someone and working. In fact, like I spoke about now with exercising, a friend of mine in Cape Town, I mean, we don't see each other for a whole year and only at the end of the year. And we don't talk that much during the year either because she has kids, I have kids, we're working, it's busy. But, we were talking during December and I was telling her how I struggle with like being consistent with exercise and staying away from soda, etc. And I started messaging her every morning saying, oh, guess what? I did like, 10-minute Pilates exercise. And she's like, oh, great, whatever. That's accountability. Because I've started doing that, I know she's going to message me later on because I haven't messaged her yet to say, and so did you do any exercises today? And so you can leverage your friend groups, your WhatsApp groups, and the minute you say to somebody that you respect and that can be hard, can be on your case without you feeling bad about it, that this is what you're going to do, that you can ask them, I need you to check in on me. I need you to tell me, like, get your ass in gear. What are you doing? Like, why aren't you doing this?
Yeah.
And that's accountability. And those two things in combination can be very powerful in getting you to stick with your goals.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. To wrap it up, finally, what does a compassionate ADHD friendly routine look like? And how can listeners start to build one today without feeling overwhelmed or defeated?
Yes, so what I mean by that is really what I spoke about earlier about capacity informed, is that um, it's great to listen to all these tips and get all these hacks, etc., from YouTube and Instagram, but it's important that you always remember that anything you hear is not everything works perfectly for one person as it does for another. So there might be something that resonates with you and you're like, oh, I'm going to try that. Compassionate care for yourself is about saying, I'm going to try that and see what works and what doesn't work. If it doesn't work, it's not that I'm a failure. It's that that doesn't work for me or that form of that doesn't work for me. And I need to take into consideration my time and my capacity. So for me, as a mom of four, who it's my time or capacity is very different to somebody who doesn't have kids. But that doesn't mean that my capacity is less. It's just different because maybe
Mm.
that person has an aging parent they have to care for, or maybe they have like the strain of having to work like three jobs because what they earn isn't enough. Or the classic example I always say, like people say, oh, we all have the same 24 hours in a day. And no, we don't, because my domestic worker has to wake up at an ungodly hour and get on a taxi to get to my house, to be at my house on time. Her morning routine can't look like mine. She doesn't have the same 24 hours. So we have to understand what our capacity is in real life. And by doing that, we also then accommodate for changes. Because that's the thing. If you create, there's lots of videos on time blocking and all of that stuff, which are great. A lot of aspects of it are great. But they forget to say, like, you have to take into what happens if things don't go according to plan. If
Mm.
you've got this rigid, structured time blocking, and then something like this morning that I had to, to do something else before coming here, like
Yes.
how do you find your way back and get back on the wagon if you don't have like guiding posts and you don't have that compassion for yourself and know that things inevitably goes wrong because life happens when you're making other plans, right?
Yes.
So that's really what compassion is about, having compassion for yourself, self-reflecting, being, I always say to my clients, everything in mental health, everything starts with self-awareness, mental health and physical health. It first starts with knowing yourself, knowing your body. Mindfulness isn't just about meditation. Mindfulness is about being present with yourself. So, am I hungry? Am I thirsty? I don't know. Maybe I am, maybe I'm not. Like, don't eat because you must eat. Eat because you're hungry. Or, am I tired? Like, I didn't realize I was tired until I sat down. How many of us say that? Only when
Yeah.
we sit down at the end of the day and then it like hits us like a truck because we are not being mindful about what is happening in our bodies and our brains. So, compassion care is really starting with that, being in touch with yourself and in tune with yourself and what you're feeling, what your brain is doing, why you're feeling those things, and then setting up, picking tools and strategies that fits with your life and your capacity and your reality, and not what some influencer says on Instagram.
Oh, perfect. No, thank you. I feel like this podcast was so insightful. I've also learned a bit from it. So, Tasneem, thank you so much, of course, for sharing your expertise and practical wisdom with us today. For everyone listening, remember executive functioning is a skill set we can all strengthen, and there's no one size fits all solution, sadly. Start small, be kind to yourself, and of course, celebrate progress over perfection. And don't forget to subscribe to MediMag, the podcast, for more expert interviews. Thank you so much for joining us today, Tasneem.